Here's a business that sounds almost too good to be real. You put up a building. Your tenants are Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Meta, some of the wealthiest companies in the history of money. They sign leases measured not in years but in decades. They buy their own equipment and install it themselves. And demand is so far ahead of supply that in the largest data center market on Earth, vacancy has been running under 2%. Near zero vacancy. Investment-grade tenants. 15-year contracts. If you designed the perfect landlord business in a laboratory, it would look something like this. So explain this. Right now, there are data centers standing completely finished, steel up, roof on, cooling installed, racks bolted to the floor, sitting dark, earning nothing. And there are companies willing to write checks with more zeros than most national budgets who cannot get one built on the timeline they want. Not because of money, not because of demand, not even because of computer chips, because they can't get electricity. The most advanced industry humanity has ever produced, the one building artificial intelligence, has run headfirst into a bottleneck created by a technology that's more than a century old, the electrical grid. And once you understand why, you'll understand what a data center actually is, which is almost nothing like what people think. Start with the fantasy. In the dream, this is a quiet warehouse full of blinking lights, cool air, humming servers, no customers to deal with, no inventory to manage, no storefront. You collect rent from the richest tenants alive and go home. Here's the reality. The land under it is often the cheapest part of the entire deal. The equipment sitting inside frequently costs more than the building holding it, and unlike the building, that equipment is close to worthless in a few short years. Your biggest ongoing bill isn't the mortgage, it's the power. And whether you can earn a single dollar depends on a utility company you don't own, on a waiting list you don't control. So before you build anything, you need to understand what you're actually buying. And this is the reframe that unlocks the whole industry. This business does not measure in square feet. Every other kind of commercial property on Earth is priced by area. Offices, warehouses, retail, apartments, dollars per square foot. Data centers threw that out. They measure in megawatts. Megawatts of power capacity. That's the unit they build in, the unit they sell in, and the unit they compete over. Floor space is almost incidental. You could hand an operator twice the square footage, and it would be worth close to nothing extra, because the constraint was never room for the machines. It was power to run them, and the ability to carry away the heat they produce. So you're not buying a building that happens to have electricity running into it. You're buying an electrical substation that happens to have a roof over it. And as always, one word is covering several very different businesses. Retail co-location means renting individual cabinets and cages to hundreds of smaller tenants. Wholesale means leasing an entire building to a single giant on one enormous contract. There are enterprise facilities companies build for themselves, small edge sites tucked near cities to cut delay, and now an entirely new category, the AI training factory, which runs at power densities the previous generation of buildings physically cannot handle. Same phrase, genuinely different machines. Let's put real numbers on it. Building capacity costs somewhere in the range of $7 to $12 million per megawatt for the shell, the power infrastructure, the backup generation, and the cooling. So a 100-megawatt campus is a billion-dollar-plus project before a single server is delivered. On the other side, tenants are billed per kilowatt per month. You're not renting them a room, you're renting them the ability to consume electricity and have the heat taken away. Which brings up the number that quietly determines whether you make money at all. It's called PUE, Power Usage Effectiveness. And the idea is simple. For every watt of electricity that actually reaches a computer, how many watts did the whole building burn to make that possible? A best-in-class modern facility runs around 1.1, meaning overhead is roughly 10%. An older room might run 1.8 or 2, meaning close to half the power coming in never touches a computer at all. It gets burned keeping the place cool. Now understand what that means for your business. You're buying electricity and reselling the useful part of it. Every watt lost to inefficiency is money you paid for and cannot sell. Efficiency here isn't an environmental slogan. Efficiency is the margin. So we know what it costs, we know how it's priced. We know demand is effectively unlimited, and the tenants are the most creditworthy on the planet. So why can't anyone build fast enough? Because there's a queue, and what you're waiting in line for isn't permits, isn't steel, isn't concrete, and isn't chips. It's power. You're waiting in line for electricity. When you want to connect a very large load to the grid, you don't just call the utility and schedule an appointment. You file an application, and you enter what's called an interconnection queue. And in the most active markets, that queue can run for years. The utility has to study whether the grid can even carry you, and often the honest answer is no, not until somebody builds new transmission lines, new substations, and in some cases new generation. And here's a detail that sounds almost too small to matter until you see the timeline. The large transformers that step grid power down into something a facility can use are specialized industrial equipment, built by a handful of manufacturers worldwide. Lead times on them have stretched to years. You can have the land, the money, the tenant, the permits, and the chips, and still be sitting on your hands waiting for a piece of steel and copper to come off a production line on another continent. There's no example of this more perfect than a stretch of Northern Virginia they call Data Center Alley. Loudoun County became the most important patch of ground on the internet, largely by accident. Decades ago, some of the earliest major network exchange points were built in that region. Networks connect to networks, so more networks came to be near them. Then data centers came to be near the networks. Then more came to be near those. It compounded, decade after decade, until an extraordinary share of the world's internet traffic was passing through a few square miles of Virginia farmland. That's gravity. In this industry, success attracts more success, physically. And then it hit a wall. Demand for power in that county grew so fast that the local utility had to warn that it couldn't connect everyone on the timelines they wanted. Projects slowed. Fights broke out over who gets capacity, who pays to upgrade the grid, and whether ordinary households should see their bills rise to fund it. Read that again, because it's the whole story in one sentence. The place that won so completely that it ran out of electricity. Now let's go through the money, and the first number is genuinely surprising. Land is often the cheapest part of the deal. In a business everyone assumes is real estate, the dirt is frequently the smallest line item on the page. What you're really paying for is proximity to power and fiber. The facility itself, shell, power distribution, backup generators, cooling, runs that $7 to $12 million per megawatt we talked about. But here's the inversion nobody expects. The equipment inside frequently costs more than the building holding it. High-end AI accelerators run tens of thousands of dollars apiece, and a single densely packed AI rack can cost millions. In any normal building, the structure is the asset, and the contents are furniture. Here it's backwards, and it gets worse, because the expensive half wears out fast. The building is financed over 30 years. The machines inside may be economically finished in 3 to 6. Then power, which is typically the single largest operating expense. Forever. Then cooling, and with it, water, because many facilities use evaporative cooling that consumes serious volumes of it, which has become a real political problem in dry regions. And then the line item that isn't there, labor. A billion-dollar facility drawing as much electricity as a small city might be run by a few dozen people. This may be the most capital-intensive and least labor-intensive major industry in the modern economy. So how does the money come back? The first way is co-location, renting cabinets and cages to many tenants, billed per kilowatt per month. The second is wholesale, leasing an entire building to a single hyperscaler on a long triple-net contract. And critically, these deals are often signed before construction finishes. You're not gambling on demand. You're building against a signed 15-year commitment from one of the most creditworthy companies on earth, which is exactly why lenders will fund it. The third stream is the one almost nobody outside the industry knows about, and it's beautiful. It's called the cross-connect. If your company is in the building and you want a direct physical link to another company in that same building, the operator runs a cable between your cage and theirs. That's it. A cable. It costs the operator very little, once, and then they bill you every single month, for as long as you need it. That is one of the highest margin recurring products in all of infrastructure, and it's the same lesson we found in the shopping mall, wearing different clothes. Position is worth more than space, which points at the deepest thing about this business. The value of a data center is largely determined by who else is already inside it. A facility with hundreds of networks and cloud providers, one cable pull away, is worth vastly more than an identical empty building down the road, because being there gives you instant access to all of them. And once a company's equipment is installed and connected, moving it is so expensive and so risky that they mostly never do. Gravity pulls them in, and switching costs keep them there. It's a network effects business hiding inside a real estate business. But the real moat is simpler than any of that. It's the power agreement. In a constrained market, a signed connection for large-scale electricity can be worth more than the land, the building, and the permits combined. It's the same protected scarcity we found in the gaming license and the hospital's certificate of need, except here, it isn't enforced by a regulator. It's enforced by physics. Two more things hiding under the surface. The first is an accounting question with real teeth. Operators have extended how long they assume servers will last, which increases reported profits today. The open question is whether AI hardware running flat out actually survives that long. If the accounting life is longer than the physical life, then today's earnings are quietly borrowing from tomorrow's write-downs. And some operators have borrowed heavily against those chips as collateral, which works beautifully, unless the collateral depreciates faster than the loan. The second is political. States compete for these projects with large tax exemptions on equipment. Then the facility arrives, employs very few people, and consumes enormous power and water. That bill is now coming due in the form of local moratoriums, rate disputes, and communities asking what exactly they got. And there's an obsolescence trap too. A data center built for modest power density physically cannot host modern AI racks. The roof is fine, the steel is fine, the economics are finished. Same story as the dead mall. The building didn't change, what the world needed from it did. So strip all of it back. What is this thing, really? It isn't a technology business. It isn't really a real estate business either. It's an energy business. You buy electricity wholesale, convert it into computation, and sell it retail at a markup. The building is packaging. The chips are consumables. The power contract is the asset, which reframes the entire race everyone's watching. The competition to build artificial intelligence isn't fundamentally a contest about models or talent or even chips. It's a contest for electricity, and nobody can build a power plant in 18 months. So step back and look at what we've actually found. The most abstract industry ever created, an industry that deals in information, in models, in things with no physical form at all, has run headfirst into the most concrete constraints imaginable. Turbines, transformers, transmission lines, copper, cooling water, things that get manufactured in factories with waiting lists and installed by crews with hard hats. You cannot write software to fix a transformer shortage. You cannot raise a funding round that makes a substation appear next year instead of in 5. The digital economy has collided with the physical one, and the physical one sets the schedule. Which is why something genuinely strange is happening right now. Technology companies are becoming power companies. Not as a metaphor, literally. They're signing agreements directly with nuclear plants to buy their output. They're funding new reactor designs. They're installing their own gas generation on site rather than waiting in the grid queue. When the bottleneck is electricity, the logical move is to stop being a customer of the power industry and start being part of it. And on the other side, the resistance is building. Communities are pushing back on noise, on water, on land, and above all on their own electricity bills. Moratoriums and rate fights are now a real risk to the pipeline. It turns out a business that consumes a city's worth of power and employs a few dozen people is a harder political sell than anyone expected when the tax incentives were written. Which brings us to the question everyone is circling. Is this the largest infrastructure build-out of our lifetime, or the largest capital expenditure bubble in history? The honest answer is that it's probably not either extreme, and the distinction matters. The demand is almost certainly real. People are using these systems, and computing needs have grown for decades without ever reversing. The risk isn't that nobody wants it. The risk lives in the timing and the financing. You are pouring concrete for a 30-year building, filling it with equipment that may be obsolete in 3, borrowing against that equipment, and betting that a small number of enormous customers keep spending at a pace they've never sustained for this long before. If that spending merely slows, not stops, slows, the math gets uncomfortable very quickly. And it gets uncomfortable for the people holding the buildings, not the people renting them. But before we close, there's something worth sitting with about these places. Walk into one, and the striking thing isn't the technology, it's the emptiness. $1 billion of construction, drawing as much electricity as a small city, and you might not see 3 human beings the entire time you're inside. No crowds, no activity, no bustle. The loudest thing in the room is the cooling. And that's where the reframe lands. The cloud was always a marketing word. There is no cloud. Every message you've ever sent, every photo you've stored, every video you've streamed, every answer an AI has ever given you, all of it lives in a hot metal warehouse in a field somewhere, drinking electricity and water, guarded by a fence. So should you build one? As always, there are 2 versions of this story. In the good version, you control land with a secured, large-scale power agreement in a constrained market, pre-leased to an investment-grade tenant on a 15-year term. That may be the single most valuable infrastructure position of this decade, because you don't just own a building, you own the bottleneck. In the hard version, you built speculatively, at a power density the next generation of hardware has already outgrown, financed against equipment losing value faster than your loan is shrinking, still waiting on a grid connection that keeps slipping another quarter. And your fixed costs do not care that the racks are empty. Here's the thing to carry out of this. For 30 years, the story we told ourselves was that computing was becoming weightless, infinite, nearly free. Everything was moving into the air, into the cloud, out of the physical world, and into somewhere clean and abstract. It never happened. Computing didn't become weightless. It just got moved somewhere we don't look. And it got heavier. We thought we were building a cloud. We were building a furnace. And right now, we are feeding it everything we've got.